Moving into section 3, we have Windows or Winders. It's a heavy operating system to learn, but definitely worth your time to learn it because we have so many organizations and use cases for Windows system administrators or people who really need to have a deeper understanding of the Windows operating system. You can make an entire career out of being a Windows sysadmin. So starting with, it's a consistent and reliable operating system used by everybody. And there are three main accounts when we're talking about the operating system. Starting with the built-in account. So every account that's automatically created when you have the operating system installed are going to be your built-in accounts. And at a minimum, every Windows system will have the admin account, so your administrator account, and a guest account built in. Starting with the admin account, the administrator account, this is going to be the account with the highest level of privileges and permissions. So users are authenticated as administrators. These are people that are going to be able to take administrative actions on your computer, like installing software or devices. They can make changes to system configuration settings. They can manage other user accounts, and you cannot delete the administrator account. It's going to be in every single Windows operating system as it is built in. Moving into the guest account, this is intended for like temporary access. If you've ever seen it on your computer where you can log in as yourself or the guest account, it's pretty much when the user account doesn't exist, and it has limited abilities. I would say significantly limited abilities for the actions you can take on your computer if you're using the guest account, but usually the password isn't required, and this account also cannot be deleted as it is a built-in account. Moving into your local account, this is going to be the account that's authenticated by the local machine. And those local account credentials are managed in a local database in something called the SAM. The SAM database, which you should definitely know, is the Security Accounts Manager. Anything that's going to be local accounts that are authenticated, they're going to go by the SAM database. So now just think the Security Account Manager, it's your reason of authority to say the credentials are correct or not, and it will keep track of what credentials are to what user, and it will pretty much be the police to say the credentials are correct and overall the maintainer of your credentials. Moving into the domain account, this is usually authenticated by something called a domain controller. A domain controller, it's going to just be a server that's running in your organization that stores your domain account credentials in a database called Active Directory. This in itself is an entire concept that would be a lecture an hour long, and there's an entire module dedicated to the Windows operating system in depth. So we are definitely going to revisit all of these terms that we have thrown out, but just for now, be aware of the three main types of accounts that we have, with the first one being the built-in account, which include your admin and guest, the second being your local, and the third account being a domain account. These are all three main user accounts that you can have within the Windows operating system. And lastly, the file structure. Windows operates off of a hierarchical structure where all files fall under a root directory and are assigned a drive letter. I'm sure this looks familiar to you if you've ever stored your files in File Explorer and you store them in your user folder or downloads or desktop, or maybe you're on OneDrive. You're probably working out of the C drive, but if your computer also has another hard drive allocated to it, maybe you also have a D drive, or if you plug in a USB, maybe that pops up as a X drive or an E drive, and it will allocate it to that new drive letter. And everything will start at that hierarchical process, which we'll cover as well, starting at the root. And the root is just the slash this equals root, because it's the start of the top of the tree for the highest hierarchical point of contact we can have for all files that fall underneath it. Some basic folders to know. As we mentioned, we have the users directory that's going to hold all your subdirectories for each user logged into the system. Think of the user profile for your users folder. So if your user is Haley, I will have a C:// and then I'll be in the users folder here. Then I'll follow up with another directory / and it will be Haley or OneDrive, Haley, etc. So also, this is the more modern approach to the users folder. Legacy Windows operating systems prior to Windows Vista, it was called Documents and Settings. So if you've ever heard Documents and Settings, just know that the more modern approach, welcome to 2023, we're now in the users directory. Program files is a good one to know. This is going to store everything for your installed software. I'm sure you've seen this on your computer before for if you've downloaded a software from the internet and had it run. It's going to ask you if you can install it in the default directory of program files, and it's just a good file folder to know that it still stores everything you need to run your programs and your software. The Windows folder itself, that's the Windows operating system's system root folder. It'll be right there. And System32, definitely would star this one. It's going to hold all of your binaries that are related to Windows files, programs, Windows commands for the command line, any sort of binary executable needed for the Windows operating system is going to be within System32. Now, if you go on your computer and you open up Windows System32, it's probably going to look like a dumpster fire because there's a whole lot of random stuff that's contained within it. And that's pretty much a good place for malware to hide because we really don't know everything that's always in System32, what's legitimate or what's not, compared to if we compared the contents within my users folder. I know pretty much what's in my users folder as it's related to my user profile, and I use it every day. But I don't really look in System32 every day, and I'm not familiar with all of the Windows binary files and programs that are built into the system that are legitimate or not legitimate. So you can easily put a file in System32, and that could be your malware. It's definitely one of the top places for malware to hide and resign is within System32 because there's just a lot going on in there, and if it's legit or not, probably wouldn't notice it as obviously as you would in another folder. Going into folder properties, so if you ever right-clicked on a file or a folder and went into properties, it would pull up this menu here for your different tabs that you've probably seen for general, sharing, security, previous versions, and to customize it. It'll give you information about the type of file or folder that you're operating with. So this is a file type document. The location, this is in Wendy's user profile on her desktop. The size is currently 0 bytes, so there's nothing in it, and nothing's been written to disk, and it contains 0 files and 0 folders. Give you a created date and the attributes here for read-only or hidden, or you can go into the advanced setting and apply your own attributes to it. So all of this encompasses folder properties. And within folder properties, we pretty much have two main objectives here. We're going to set attributes and we're going to set permissions on that folder. So an attribute, a set of characteristics that define the folder's behavior. So what it's allowed to do. Can someone only have read-only access to it? Is the folder going to be hidden and out of sight from the user? Are we going to archive it? Can it be compressed? And you would see this on the properties option when you right-click the folder and just brings up this menu. Permissions, this is pretty much who can do what to that folder and determines which users or groups have access to a folder and what actions they can perform. So can they read what's inside the folder? Can they write to the folder and add files to it? Can they execute anything within the folder or the file itself? And there are basically two types for access. We have NTFS for local access, and then over the network access, just a term called share. If you've heard of a share before, it's pretty much, as the name suggests, sharing resources. So a share is going to be two computers sharing resources over the network. So it's a directory sharing capabilities, access share over the network, properties, and then the sharing tab right here if you want to share this out over a network drive. And local access would be the opposite, not going over the network, just staying locally for normal Windows file access. You can also go to the security tab up top, and if you want to see the additional permissions that are set on it for how it's being shared out to see if it's local access or network access, you would just do this in the security tab. So high-level overview of folder permissions, really thinking about the difference between the attributes, which is what the folder can do, and then permissions, what can users do to that folder. This is definitely an important slide to know. The Windows command line interface, we're going to just call this CLI from now on for short. And this is the terminal. Remember in the beginning, we talked about two different ways that you can interact with the computer. We can either do it through the GUI, again, which we mentioned is File Explorer, or we can do it through the back end with the command line interface. And this is a one-for-one representation of your computer in a non-GUI form, in the command line form. So it's going to be in the form of a shell or a terminal. And you can take all the same actions that you can on the GUI front end side, and you should definitely be familiar with quite a few Windows commands to get you started. CLS would clear your screen, help would bring up the help menu, or if you type in a command followed by help, it will give you help to how to execute that command. CD is change directory, so move from folder to folder. Dir is display the contents of the directory that you're currently at. So show the files within this folder. Maybe there's folders within folders. Path, make a directory, remove a directory, type, and then append or overwrite, and then task list to show the running processes on your Windows computer. Again, we should cover the significance of root here being the slash. Remember, this was the hierarchical structure that Windows starts in, and it can have a bunch of subfolders after it. And this is now going to be referred to as the absolute path. So if we had users, Haley, and then desktop, this would be the absolute path for file1.txt. If I had a text file on my desktop called file1.txt, the absolute path will need to start at root, the top of the hierarchical folder structure here within Windows. It will need to start at the root directory. The relative path would be wherever I'm presently working. So maybe that's my desktop. So the relevant path is also displayed as a dot when you're using the command line. And you can also use PWD in Linux, which we're going to cover later, for printing your working directory. But since we're in Windows, the equivalent command would be just echoed out to the screen where you are for the command variable, and you would get your path for where you're at. But basically, your relative path is going to start relative to your present working directory. So if we're currently working out of the desktop directory, that is our relative path for this file. And If we're wanting the absolute path for this file, we need to write out the entire Windows hierarchical structure for where the file can be found starting at root. Even more important is it's still important to learn the CMD CLI for Windows, but nowadays everyone's switching to PowerShell, and because it's pretty much the new and improved version of the command line shell, it's now a PowerShell, and it's going to function off of every command that you can do on the CMD version here. This is cmd.exe. It will be able to do all of the commands and more from this shell in PowerShell, and even take some Linux commands and other commandlets that you can put to it to write shorthand versions of your commands, make your syntax a lot easier, and have, as its name suggests, more powerful shell capabilities. There's going to be some links in the description for you to get familiar with people who can teach you the command line way better than I ever could for the classic cmd.exe and the new PowerShell.exe, but I would just get a really high level understanding of maybe 25 commands or so that you can navigate out of your command shell with and also do within PowerShell as a good starting place. You don't need to master it or be an expert. And then there's also a link in the description to be able to understand what the difference is between cmd.exe and PowerShell. Moving into important Windows logs to consider. Over here, this is the Windows Event Viewer, and this is your interface, your GUI interface to your Windows event logs. There are three main types of Windows event logs that you should be aware of. Your application, this is obviously to start, application, system, and security. Now, if you're having a hard time, remember it is application, system, and security, and you'll be all set. Now, the application logs are going to contain all your events logged by non-operating system third-party applications. So application logs for application. System, that's every event logged by the operating system. So anything related to any action that the operating system took, as its name suggests, will fall into your system logs. And then security, we'll put a star next to that one because this is related to any security event that happens on the computer, as it could relate to user activities, logging on, logging off, failed logins, resource access attempts, failure to access those resources. I would say from a blue team perspective, definitely the security logs are one that we use and look at and analyze all the time to comb through all of the events within the Windows Event Viewer, which saves these as EVTX files when you export it. And we're looking constantly at the security.evtx file to analyze it, see if we can get some anomalous login activity or login failures or password changes or any kind of audit information related to the security events that are happening on your computer system. So if you'd like to just open up the Windows Event Viewer on your Windows laptop or your Windows computer, if you have one, just hit the Windows key or go into the search menu bar and type in Windows Event Viewer, and it'll pull it up, and you can take a look at your security logs yourself to see when you've logged on, logged off, or taken any kind of access to resources at all. So definitely be good to check that out.